Story 1. As a child whose primary language was not English, I learned a great deal of English vocabulary from games. I still remember the surprise of my high school English teacher when most of the class unexpectedly knew the seemingly obscure word, cobblestone. Story 2. In Cyberpunk, there are beat cops. Initially, I thought beat in beat cop indicated that the officer was exhausted or had been defeated by someone. Beat cops are simply police officers assigned to specific areas to patrol, known as beats. Story 3. I would have to say real-time strategy games have been the best teachers. They force you to juggle multiple factors, weighing resources, risks, and determining defense and attack, along with navigating politics. You must balance skills and industry within your society, all while striving for long-term survival. Sometimes I consider a real-world problem as if it were a real-time strategy game and ask how I would address it given the rules of the game. There is a lot of great material on game theory and how it applies to life. Story 4. I'm not sure what world facts are, but Roller Coaster Tycoon taught me a lot of practical things about economics and physics. Story 5. The process of making nuclear fuel from uranium ore is complicated and requires numerous chemical and physical processes to achieve. I am glad I never decided to become a chemical engineer. Additionally, there are the names of approximately 30 historical and notable landmarks around the world from the game Civilization V. Before playing Civilization V, if you had asked me about Neuschwanstein, Prora, or Borobudur, I would not have known what countries they are in or what types of structures they are. Story 6. I thought Obsidian was just a gaming concept. It turns out it is real and sharp enough to cut at a cellular level. Story 7. In The Last of Us, I learned that cordyceps fungus is real. It actually infects insects and controls their behavior. Story 8. From Red Dead Redemption 2, I learned that tuberculosis was a devastating disease before antibiotics. The game's portrayal of Arthur's slow decline made me research how tuberculosis was a leading cause of death in the 1800s, with people desperately seeking cures at sanitariums. Story 9. Orbital mechanics and a little bit about rocket science. Thanks, Kerbal Space Program. Story 10. Nancy Drew game fan here. What haven't I learned? Things the Nancy Drew games have taught us about include Mayan history and numeral systems, Roman numerals, North American birds, Cockney rhyming slang, the history of the Salem witch trials, gemstones, the history of Marie Antoinette, the French Resistance, Italian words, German words, French words, the Enigma machine, alchemy and alchemical symbols, Scottish food, and the history of Nefertari. This is not an exhaustive list. Story 11. The historical existence of Joan of Arc and Genghis Khan is featured in Age of Empires, 1997, and Age of Empires 2, 1999. Additionally, Age of Mythology 2002 provides knowledge of Greek gods, Norse gods, Egyptian gods, and the associated legends and mythology. Story 12. I haven't tested it yet, but after a few attempts at Surgeon Simulator, I believe I could give open-heart surgery a solid shot. Story 13. Submarine simulators improved my geometry and trigonometry skills, as I had to plot intercept courses based on sonar ping returns. Twilight Struggle, a computer game adaptation of a board game, taught me a lot about the Cold War and the delicate balance of power during that time. I learned various concepts in business and finance from Wall Street Radar. Europa Universalis 2 provided valuable insights into a historical period I was not very familiar with. Story 14. When I moved to Japan, I could immediately recognize several cicadas by sound alone, thanks to the game Animal Crossing. Story 15. No matter how hard you work at something, there is always a 13-year-old with an energy drink dependency who is better than you. Story 16. The Katyn Massacre and the name of the Soviet secret police are significant historical events. I have since become a historian of the Soviet Union and am working on producing films about this period in history. Story 17. You can actually bribe guards in ancient Greece. I learned this in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and it turns out to be historically accurate. Story 18. Due to my experience playing Civilization, my son developed an interest in watching me play. As a result, he consistently excelled in history class while other students struggled. We occasionally explored the historical descriptions in the game that provided accurate information. As a result, He was knowledgeable about various topics at an age when most kids were not. He learned about wonders, nations, leaders, and notable figures such as scientists. Story 19. 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors taught me about a real medical condition called prosopagnosia, where a person becomes unable to distinguish one face from another. Story 20. I have learned more about the Renaissance era from Assassin's Creed 2 than from college. A more recent example involves a chain of different but related knowledge. I have always been a fan of the Art Nouveau style. I recently discovered from Claire Obscure, Expedition 33, that the era during which Art Nouveau thrived was called Belle Époque. That exploration led me to learn that Clair Obscur is the French term for chiaroscuro, which refers to the high-contrast art styles that were popular in the Baroque era. Chiaroscuro itself is a term I learned from Life is Strange, as it is one of the earliest photography movements due to the strong black and white contrasts presented in early photography. I have gained a lot of real-world knowledge from video games. Story 21. Assassin's Creed taught me real historical facts about cities and famous figures that I never learned in school. Story 22. Kingdom Come. Deliverance taught me that getting into any fight where I am outnumbered is a bad idea, and honor is for the dead, so anything I can do to even those odds is what I should do. It also motivated me to learn more about how the Catholic Church's power and influence changed over the centuries and the ideas that eventually contributed to the Protestant Reformation. I barely knew what antipope meant before that game, and I had never heard of indulgences, so it was a valuable learning experience. Story 23. Louis Daguerre was a French painter who created daguerreotypes, a process that gave portraits a sharp reflective style, resembling a mirror. Story 24. Gran Turismo gave me the first idea of how speed and corners work together, including the breaking point and related concepts. Story 25. Cigarettes contain benzopyrene, a chemical that contributes to lung cancer. It is known that when benzopyrene enters the body, it transforms into benzopyrene dialipoxide, which then attaches to receptors on the p53 gene, a gene associated with lung cancer. The benzopyrene dialipoxide binds to the p53 gene in 3 specific locations, leading to precancerous changes in lung tissue. Story 26. I first learned about nuclear waste disposal from Metal Gear Solid. It blew my mind. Story 27. Thanks to the portal, I now know that terminal velocity in Earth's atmosphere is about 120 miles per hour. My physics professor was pretty impressed when I brought this up in class. Who knew that playing as a test subject would actually teach me something useful? Story 28. I learned the word Bruja from Bane in Batman, Arkham, and learned about Sir Francis Drake from Uncharted. Story 29. One perspective on the issue of global warming suggests that governments often neglect it. An example can be found in the game Civilization 2, which simulates global warming by flooding coastal areas and promoting desertification as pollution increases. Players can mitigate pollution in various ways, such as using clean energy sources like hydroelectric dams or implementing recycling programs. However, even if you adopt environmentally friendly policies, there is no assurance that neighboring civilizations will do the same. Despite the involvement of the United Nations, you cannot effectively pressure other nations to reduce their pollution. Unless you resort to drastic measures such as invasion, there is no way to stop their harmful practices. This leads to a question. Why invest resources in combating pollution if global warming seems inevitable? Those who genuinely care about the environment risk being outcompeted by others who do not prioritize it, creating a dilemma often referred to as the tragedy of the commons. Story 30. Assassin's Creed. Odyssey taught me a lot about Greek island geography and refreshed my memory of Greek mythology. Story 31. I learned orbital mechanics from Kerbal Space Program. I learned not to trust the marketing material from Kerbal Space Program 2. Story 32. I learned many fish and dish names from Stardew Valley. It was the second game I played in English. The first was Terraria, both of which have limited text. Story 33. Eating a whole roast turkey is actually very beneficial for you and can sometimes help you recover from severe health issues. Story 34. Thanks to Silent Hunter 3, I learned how to plot the course, speed, and angle on the bow of a ship I want to destroy, calculate a torpedo firing solution, and evade depth charges when the escorts attempt to attack me. Essentially, I learned how to navigate like in Das Boot. Story 35. Battlefield and dialing in scopes for long-range engagements with firearms. If you mainly played Call of Duty as a young child or teenager, like many others, it may lead you to believe your bullets will always hit exactly where your red dot or crosshair is. But that's not how ballistics works. Projectiles experience drop-off. Sights are parallel to the gun barrel. You could also be horizontally misaligned. When you set up any sight, you are creating a y-intercept of the projectile's flight path and the red dot or crosshair. A lot of care goes into having a precise, effective weapon. Story 36. I learned that you can't just travel in a straight line from point A to point B when moving through space, thanks to the Kerbal Space Program and orbital mechanics in general. Story 37. Haboob is a strong wind that occurs primarily along the southern edges of the Sahara in Sudan and is associated with large sandstorms and dust storms. Saul Bright taught me that one. Story 38. The portal helped me understand momentum in physics much better than my high school teacher ever did. When I finally took advanced placement physics, I kept thinking about those portal mechanics during the momentum unit. I earned an A in that class. Story 39. I remember the early Call of Duty games set during World War II, and how some missions felt fabricated for a video game, only to later learn that they actually occurred, albeit with some liberties taken. A random example is Pavlov's house, where German forces assaulted an apartment building but were unable to capture it. Story 40. Playing The Last of Us taught me that cordyceps fungi actually exist and can take over insect brains in real life. I mentioned this during a first date, and it turned out to be a better conversation starter than I expected. Story 41. This wasn't mentioned in the game, but it is a cool fact. Ubisoft provided their mapped model of the Notre Dame Cathedral when it burned down to help with the rebuilding. That's pretty wild if you ask me. Story 42. I have gained a solid understanding of orbital dynamics and Newtonian mechanics from playing many space games. Story 43. I learned how to read by playing Tetris on the Game Boy. I'm not sure if this directly counts. I developed confidence and patience, and I learned to win and lose by playing Street Fighter 2. I realized I discovered something I was good at: gaming. Story 44. How not to die while driving through a herd of deer on the road at highway speeds. Video games saved my life. Richard Burns Rally had a challenging tutorial that required you to master skills before you could race. The closed parking lot, traffic cones, and detailed instructions felt a bit tedious to my younger self. I must have failed each section numerous times. However, to play the game, you had to complete the tutorials, which became a slog. I put in the effort. Learning Scandi Flicks was enjoyable, but all the other maneuvers focused on understanding how car physics worked and how they felt. I had to learn how to influence understeer and oversteer just by braking and accelerating. These concepts are not thoroughly taught in my country when learning to drive, and they certainly are not tested when issuing licenses. Learning how to take extreme corners quickly by altering the weight distribution over my front wheels was unexpected from a video game. Video game skills are typically regarded as high-level concepts like task management. Richard Burns Rally saved my life. After driving 400 kilometers to the nearest city, I was now driving the 400 kilometers back home at 11 p.m. Exhausted, my attention was everywhere but on the road. Suddenly, I was looking a deer in the eyes through my driver's side window, and I swear I could see my own reflection in its glossy black eyes. Time seemed to stop. The road ahead was filled with the rest of the herd, all frozen in my headlights. I was racing toward them at 110 kilometers per hour with not enough time to even blink. At least 10 deer were in front of me, covering both lanes of the highway, with the first one less than a car length from my hood. I couldn't brake in time, and even if I had, I would have locked up my front wheels and gone straight through most of the herd. My car would be totaled, and I would be dead. Deer through the windshield. Roll over? I don't remember making a decision. Suddenly, everything was happening at once. I didn't slam on the brakes. I jerked the wheel left and hit the accelerator as the weight of the car shifted. Flashes of tawny fur streaked through the corners of my vision. I slammed the car back to the right as I spotted a white and black hindquarter out my passenger window, tapped the brakes, then swerved left again, almost touching another deer. A light touch on the gas. I turned the wheel to the right as another gangly form passed inches from my driver's side mirror. I braked to shift the weight back over the front of the car, and suddenly I was through the herd. A group of startled deer, tinted red by my brake lights in the rearview mirror, quickly receded into the distance. Into the night. Not a hair on their heads was grazed. It was surreal to suddenly regain awareness, to return to my regular thoughts and decision-making after feeling as if someone else had taken the wheel. Jesus didn't take the wheel that night, but Richard Burns surely did. I am confident that his monotonous instructions during those lengthy tutorial hours, along with all the developers tweaking the controls and physics to bring a digital representation to life on my screen, kept me alive. My thanks to them all. My mind did not wander for the rest of the drive home. Story 45. Queen Hatshepsut pretended to be a man to assume the throne in Carmen Sandiego's Great Chase Through Time. Story 46. Always start with cavalry, using blitz promotion, and upgrade through tanks to giant death robots to dominate the endgame. Story 47. The pirate Blackbeard actually laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina, to obtain medicine for his crew. The story is significantly embellished in the video game Assassin's Creed. Black Flag. Story 48. Cover versus concealment refers to the distinction between protection and hiding. It is important to understand what can and cannot be shot through and the significance of placing something solid between you and someone you prefer not to confront. Story 49. Age of Empires. Eric the Red was a Viking. I surprised my 6th grade teacher with that one. I also surprised them with my discussion of Mayan and Aztec warriors. Story 50. Not exactly facts, but I learned many words from researching Diablo 2 as a child. In particular, amelioration is one that I can recall now. Story 51. Even if you help others, it doesn't mean they will help you. This theme is evident throughout The Last of Us. When people want something or are desperate, they will do anything to obtain it. It is often better to be alone and watch your own back than to rely on someone else, who may end up being a greater threat than the challenges you were initially facing. Story 52. For all my civilization friends out there who enjoyed the Civipedias, who else received 0 effort grades in their social studies and history classes? Story 53. Did you know that in Assassin's Creed Origins, they recreated ancient Egypt with historical accuracy? The pyramids are where they should be, the hieroglyphs are authentic, and the layout of Alexandria is based on archaeological research. Story 54. Climbing a ladder is a socially acceptable way to scale a building. Climbing on the building itself is not. Story 55. Louis Daguerre was a French painter who created daguerreotypes, a process that gave portraits a sharp reflective style, similar to that of a mirror. Story 56. Risk of Rain 2 taught me that snipers were named for their ability to shoot birds in the forest called snipes. Story 57. I learned a lot of history from Age of Empires 2. The campaigns are based on real historical figures and the battles they fought in or led. Story 58. I learned about the existence of the White Sheep Turks and Black Sheep Turks from Europa Universalis, or perhaps it was from the sequel. I discovered many interesting facts and overall learned much more about European and Asian history in the 15th to 18th centuries from Europa Universalis than I ever did in school, which tended to focus narrowly on my own European country and a few main lines of historical development in Europe. Story 59. I learned from Assassin's Creed that many famous historical landmarks were built centuries ago with incredible detail, and they recreated them almost perfectly in the game. Like if you think video games can be educational too. Story 60. I learned about European geography and dynasties from the Crusader Kings franchise. I am still amazed at how much information I have gathered from watching Jeopardy! Story 61. Enemies scale to your level, and the only way to get ahead is to take advantage of flaws in the system, usually those your enemy is unwilling or unable to employ themselves. Thus, proportionality is a lie used so they can hold you in place and strike while they portray themselves as the victim. Story 62. Playing The Sims taught me that leaving dirty dishes around attracts bugs. I learned this the hard way in my first apartment when I was too lazy to do the dishes for a week. Story 63. I have a much more intuitive understanding of heat transfer, with real-world applications primarily related to cooking, from playing an idle power generation game, which I can't recall the name of, and from a lot of oxygen not included. Story 64. Civilization 2. I learned about many things, a bit of history, human development, world leaders, countries, and technologies. These insights were the best teachers. Story 65. There was a mission in the original Call of Duty where you fly close to a bridge to capture or destroy it. This was based on a real mission. It's a fascinating story and must have been frightening to be a part of. Story 66. I deepened my knowledge of Red Dead Redemption 2 about redemption. No matter how many mistakes you make, it is never too late to do good things and help people. Story 67. I learned about a significant number of historic weapons from the games Diablo 1 and 2. I also gained insights into the samurai power struggle from playing Dynasty Warriors, as well as skills in map reading. Story 68. The universe does not care whether you understand it or not. The universe simply exists. Story 69. RuneScape taught me that bronze is an alloy of tin and copper and introduced me to the concept of blending metals for stronger alloys. Story 70. Don't forget the hyphen between Spider and Man. Spider-Man from the hit game Spider-Man for PlayStation 4. I still think of that almost every time I write his name. It is genuinely helpful. Story 71. When I was a teenager, we had a game for our home computer based on the 1988 Winter Olympics. In the beginning, you could scroll through 5 to 10 countries to choose from. As each country appeared, you would see their flag and hear a MIDI file of the first few bars of the national anthem. That is how I learned that the riff I had always known as the beginning of All You Need Is Love is actually the opening of France's anthem. Story 72. Beginner's knowledge of astrophysics and its relation to rocket travel from Kerbal Space Program. I didn't even know apogee was a word before playing KSP or what delta V meant. Story 73. Many fantasy games that use Latin root words for monster and species names subconsciously help people learn and recognize flora and fauna designations. Story 74. No matter how strong your paladin army is, it is still unwise to charge them into a group of pikemen. Story 75. I learned from Final Fantasy VII that if you live long enough, the people you come to love, respect, and hold dear will eventually leave this world, and you will be without them. Story 76. I mean, it's not as unusual as most people think. There is a reason it's called simulators, but sim racing taught me a lot about different mechanical parts of cars, the effects of changing them, and the physics of moving a vehicle. Story 77. Vice City taught me how to navigate in Miami. The western area is just mainland Miami, and the eastern area is exactly the same. Story 78. I can name a surprising number of place names and have a general sense of where they are, thanks to Paradox interactive map games. Story 79. The Assassin's Creed series has taught me a lot about history. While there is a fictional element, the people, places, and some ideals are based on real events. Story 80. A couple of years ago, I learned that copper oxidizes from Minecraft, which I played when I was about 10 years old. Story 81. Crusader Kings has taught me a fair bit about geography and history, most notably the location of Jerusalem. Additionally, until playing the game, I never realized that the noble title of Count is analogous to Duke and that county is analogous to duchy. Story 82. Gaming has taught me that people create religions and superstitions out of everything. Gaming's beliefs are tier lists, rankings, and numerical review scores. You can count on one hand the number of games that use actual data to create tier lists, and in those, the difference between broken and useless typically boils down to a single percentile of win rate variance. It's all pseudoscience, but rest assured everyone holds on for dear life. Meanwhile, some people treat platforms like Steam reviews as factual representations of reality. Last time I checked, you don't even need to own a game or have a minute of time played to write a Steam review. For instance, if 200,000 people wrote negative reviews for a game while 100 million people played it, it illustrates that opinions are not facts. A grain of sand does not represent all the deserts on Earth. Metacritic and IMDb are unreliable sources. It's food for thought, but only a fool would treat it as truth. Story 83. You cannot be a powerful mage and a warrior at the same time. You must choose one. Additionally, you have to continuously improve your skills if you want to get better. Story 84. There is a lot of related history in the Assassin's Creed games and many general concepts you can learn. Even if it didn't provide all the accurate information, it sparked my interest to research further. Story 85. A lot of geography from the Imperial campaign in Medieval 2 Total War. I met a guy from Georgia and thought, I just conquered your country 2 days ago. Story 86. I learned that you make glass by heating sand in Minecraft. However, I am still not certain if this is entirely true. Story 87. In fighting games, I learned that no matter what, you always have to fight anybody that comes your way. Story 88. I heard that a 10-year-old boy saved his grandmother, who suddenly became unconscious because he learned to drive and steer from Mario Kart Wii. Story 89. The old Microprose games, such as Civilization and Railroad Tycoon, had comprehensive manuals that provided valuable information. Story 90. Yakuza. Like a dragon taught me that Japan does not have birthright citizenship and the societal and legal problems that can arise from this absence. Story 91. I learned that the Nazca lines in Peru are real from playing Uncharted. Before that, I thought giant geoglyphs shaped like monkeys and birds sprawled across the desert sounded made up for dramatic treasure hunting plots. It turns out they are actual ancient designs visible only from above, created over 1,500 years ago. This is proof that reality can be just as mysterious as fiction. Story 92. I have learned a lot of history from Crusader Kings 2 and 3. Additionally, Skyrim taught me that garnets are real gemstones. Story 93. I learned about herbs from Red Dead Redemption 2, such as oleander, those pretty pink flowers that are highly poisonous. Story 94. I learned that every 5 seconds, the main gun of an Everest-class dreadnought accelerates to 1.3% of light speed. It impacts with the force of a 38-kiloton bomb, which is 3 times the yield of the city buster dropped on Hiroshima back on Earth. In short, I learned that Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest force in space. Story 95. Valorant. It doesn't matter if you are doing everything you can to help and fulfill your responsibilities. If the people around you are there to bring you down or have selfish motives, you will never succeed in life. Story 96. I learned how to read and navigate maps at a very early age thanks to video games. I still use these skills every day. Story 97. Lights in video games operate on real electricity. Without passion, mastering something becomes tedious. I played a lot of StarCraft as a child, learned the fundamentals of a real-time strategy game, and now I do not engage with them because they all seem formulaic to me. One lesson I learned from my father about games in general is this: if you are not enjoying a game, why are you playing it? I remember my older brother yelling at StarCraft 2 at 2 a.m. while I had to be at work at 7. Story 98. I got an A+ on my history exam that focused on military strategy, thanks to the Total War series. I didn't even have to study. Story 99. If you suddenly have everything you need to be completely healthy and prepared, you are about to face a challenging situation. Story 100. Assassin's Creed taught me more about Renaissance history than school ever did, highlighting how real figures such as Leonardo da Vinci and the Medici family influenced the world. Story 101. I don't know if it's a fact, but I credit Ocarina of Time for both my ability to read music early and my perfect pitch. Story 102. My understanding of geography is quite good, thanks to the Total War series and Europa Universalis 4. The game also helped me become proficient in managing finances, especially when I needed to take out a loan last year to cover my bills between jobs. Story 103. After the end of World War II, the world was split into two, East and West. This marked the beginning of the era known as the Cold War. Story 104. If you invite your neighbors over to swim in your pool and then remove the ladder, they will be in danger. Story 105. I have learned stock trading fundamentals from Grand Theft Auto 5 on my mobile phone. It would be great if it worked this easily in real life, but it's quite accurate. Story 106. I learned more about medieval history from Age of Empires 2 campaigns than I ever did from history classes. Story 107. No matter how bad an enemy may be to the survival of humanity or a spaceship, There will always be people embracing the enemy and trying to become one of them. In Dead Space, the unitologists attempt to become necromorphs while adoring the marker. Story 108. From Richard Burns' Rally, I learned to keep it cool when you lose grip on a gravel road and how to regain traction control. The game features a rally school and a challenging exam to unlock the actual stages. Story 109. For a while, I played a massively multiplayer online role-playing game called Atlantica Online. It is not a history game, but it takes place on Earth with many fictionalized versions of famous historical individuals. That's where I learned about Howard Carter. It teaches players about some historical figures. Story 110. While the submarine is vastly superior to the boat in every way, over 97% of people still use boats for aquatic transportation. Story 111. The Oregon Trail taught a generation that dysentery is a terrible way to die. Always pay for the ferry ride instead of trying to ford your wagon across the river. Story 112. It isn't exactly a fact, but DayZ inspired me to create a fire barrel in my backyard. It works well for controlling the fire and is my go-to method for burning off extra garbage, such as old mail and boxes. Story 113. I learned a lot about ancient Egypt, Greece, and the Viking era from the Assassin's Creed games. Those discovery tours are excellent. Story 114. If you commit mass murder, you will have a high-level wanted status, and law enforcement will stop at nothing to apprehend you. Story 115. If you don't get it right the first time or even the 15th time, keep trying. You learn more and improve with each attempt. Don't give up. Story 116. One person can ruin the whole team because they ignore the game plan and do what they think is best. You need to work together as if you have one brain. Many people do not like this and may lose on purpose because they feel hurt when they are not the center of attention or the decision maker. Story 117. Paradox games like Hearts of Iron 4 and Crusader Kings 2 and 3 have taught me a lot about geography and some history, primarily dates and names. Story 118. A double rainbow is a phenomenon of optics that displays a spectrum of light due to the sun shining on droplets of moisture in the atmosphere. Story 119. If you are in orbit in lockstep behind something at the same altitude and speed, and you want to get closer to it, you point yourself directly away from it, burn the engine slightly, and wait. Story 120. I can't remember any of the questions that were asked, but I excelled in a theology quiz in high school because of Assassin's Creed. Story 121. While trying to create a game in Unity, I learned how light reflection works. Since then, I have started to notice it in real life as well. Story 122. There are different types of bananas, and since the Gros Michel variety is less resistant to disease, farmers switched to Cavendish. I researched further and found that a disease in the past nearly wiped out all Gros Michel bananas. This is also why the Gros Michel has a 1 in 6 chance of disappearing in Balatro, compared to Cavendish's 1 in 3,000. Story 123. I learned a lot about car control while playing Gran Turismo. The first time I saved myself from a crash, I could hardly believe it worked. It has actually saved me from accidents many times. Story 124. Battlefield 1 really opened my eyes to learning about World War I and the history surrounding it. I worked on a project about it for school, and I ensured it was accurate, even though the California school system didn't appreciate that. Nevertheless, I was able to earn my A+. Story 125. The Metal Gear Solid 2 Colonel Campbell speech accurately predicts our world today in the 2000s. Story 126. I learned to play Moonlight Sonata after hearing it in Resident Evil. I eventually found out it was a real song. Story 127. I am knowledgeable about the geography of the Las Vegas area and how to play blackjack. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.